Several organizations say the devastating fire in the building downtown Johannesburg is a stark reminder of the inherent risks associated with the neglect of the city's infrastructure. Riskonet Africa says we should be much more alert to trends like nodal shifts and urban decay. That's because there may be more areas that may become underutilized or less populated, leading to spaces like industrial parks and other buildings being misused for purposes other than that they were built for originally. Well, Volker von Widdern is joining me now just to unpack this risk, and we've seen how big it can be. Volker, good afternoon. Welcome to today, and thank you very much for your time. I mean, the sense we're getting, we have reporters also in other parts of South Africa looking at some of the urban areas and cities. The sense we're getting that we really have a huge problem in this country of fast-paced urban decay.
Yes, good afternoon to you and your viewers, and condolences to the families and the tragedy that happened in Johannesburg. Yes, we know about a high level of migration, particularly to Gauteng, because of the need for employment and many other factors. And when a combination of poor adherence to standards and a high level of population shift comes in, the standards can slip quickly. And it's like a tipping point. Things may be reasonable for a while, and then there's the standards just disappear, and then there's very little control and safety that can go in. So yes, these issues are serious, and they apply equally to citizens as well as to corporates and commercial entities in terms of the neighborhood risks that they incur.
How do you mitigate such risks? I mean, for example, in Johannesburg, this building, we understand, belonged to the city of Johannesburg, and apparently it was leased or handed over to an NGO. I mean, how do you mitigate risks to prevent similar occurrences?
Well, of course, it's easy to look back in hindsight, but I think it's really important to learn those lessons. If the standards fail, and one of the analogies is the broken window analogy that was brought out in the mid-'80s, when New York also suffered significant urban decay.
That was under Mayor Rudy Giuliani.
That's true. So, whatever the thoughts are about him, there are certainly measures that improve that environment, as we've had other improvements in South Africa. The Durban waterfront was significantly improved because of a coordinated plan. And so when we see that risk taking place, urban decay, nodal shift and things like that, the maintenance of standards and making sure that what has to be done is done according to a standard across many years is the critical issue. Now, maintaining standards doesn't cost billions. Maintaining standards means going there, seeing what's happening, making sure that the buildings are used for the reasons that they're meant to be there and they're not abandoned. When they're abandoned or there's no enforcement, then, of course, more and more, let's say, lawfulness takes place, and then people realize they can convert buildings and put 10 people into one room, which is all, of course, there are many examples of that, but just unregulated, enormous challenge to safety and health and so forth. So the issue then about the risk mitigation is you start again. What would we do right now? Identify all, let's say, 100 buildings in the same area and one by one implement standards. Now, that obviously takes some willpower, but it doesn't mean that you need to, turn the city upside down. But it does mean you have to enforce what you have to do in terms of health and safety, running water.
Yeah, we understand this building. Yeah, we understand.
The same happens.
Yeah, sorry. We understand that this building was earlier condemned, as we're told, and deemed unsafe for habitation, but it was accessed.
But that's the point. If a building is condemned, then it's got to be shuttered. In other words, you've got to block the entrances, and then you've got to find a very secure way of working on that building so that it can be brought back into a fit state for use. If it's condemned and we abandon it, that is not the adherence of standards. Condemnation, you can't send a letter in the post and say, hello, you aren't allowed to use this building. Condemnation means you stop it and you stop access to it, and then you start the process of rehabilitation in whatever form is required. And then that building should be secured, protected, and you move forward one step at a time. What's happened here is the abandonment of standards over 10 or 20 years. No wonder people have come in and taken advantage of the situation.
So what's the role of the community? I'm asking this because a couple of people yesterday, speaking to some of our reporters in the neighborhood, said they have been to the council, they've been to the police, they've been to local authorities to say, we are noticing something happening in that building. It is too dangerous. I mean, how important is that vigilance by the community?
Well, yes, and that is the tough part, because what does the community do? Because they maybe don't represent a voting bloc, maybe they present a high proportion of foreigners and many other things, and in that context, they don't have political influence over the environment, but they can still say that the city has to maintain its own infrastructure, and then launch either legal or a social action to require that attention is given to this. And I think that the lack of publicity, the lack of concerted action, the lack of accountability of councillors and so forth, all compromises this in a concerted way. So at least the publicity of it is important. And unfortunately, the tragedy is far too significant to make it worth it. No life is worth this kind of situation. But unfortunately, the lack of awareness and the lack of publicity and adherence, and people doing the jobs for which they're paid to do. And I don't think that accountability has come through at all in these 10 or 20 years.
Yeah, and currently we're not seeing much accountability either, Volker. We are seeing the blame game being played. 74 people, including 12 children, have died. Other than what you've expressed already, the responsibility from a risk perspective, would it lie with the landlord ordinarily? And if a building has been abandoned and condemned, who should shut it down? Is it the local council?
Well, yes, what happens, the landlord exited, and then the building was expropriated and now is owned by the Johannesburg city, and that was several years ago. So in this context, the city owns that property and must take control over that building, and and whatever goes wrong on that site then still becomes a city responsibility. So what we've got now is an abandoned building that's being used by one or other crime syndicate for human trafficking and other issues in terms of the rental environments. And that is obviously not approved in terms of South African law. So that is the local council's responsibility, as it would be not only in a city environment. You could have an industrial park where a factory is exited because it's no longer viable. And we know of situations where factories also turn into dormitories. Now, if you're running your factory and there's a dormitory next to you, and that factory burns, and then there's a spread of fire and it breaks down your factory, there could be problems with insurance. So in those situations, the vigilance and the awareness and making sure that properties are used for the purpose that they're intended is an ongoing issue that requires activism and engagement with council. And if not, then the council must be held liable.
Thank you very much for your time and insights this afternoon. That's Volker von Widdern. He's from Riskonet, Africa.